Show everyone. Hello and welcome to Conscious Living for this special episode of Spirit Plant Medicine. My name is Marc Caron, and we've been airing Conscious Living Radio on 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver every Wednesday at 6 o'clock for almost 2 decades now. And today I'm really happy to invite my co-organizer, good friend, host of the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference to our program today, Mr. Stephen Gray. Stephen Gray is a ceremonial leader. He's a great host and someone I'm honored to, really call a great friend over the years that we've been working together. And today we're happy. Well, Stephen, first off, thanks for joining the program today. Stephen, it's always a pleasure to have you to talk about subjects that we're both very passionate about.
For you, almost anything, Marc.
Almost anything. I love it. Thanks, Stephen. And today we're really happy to welcome our guest, Jay Katz. Jay Katz is the executive director of the Psychedelic Association of Canada, and we're going to be speaking today about access to psychedelics for all Canadians. Now, Jay is a nonprofit executive with 20 plus years of experience working as a leader, volunteer board member, and consultant in the not-for-profit sector. Jay has been the executive director of a symphony orchestra, a community center, a seniors residence, and the COO of a community foundation. He's worked as an executive coach to executives in the finance, social housing, performing arts, law, visual arts, architecture, and design, and health services, with a specialization in first-time CEOs and C-suite executives. The boards on which Jay has volunteered include the Marc Center for Sexual Diversity Studies at the University of Toronto, Arts Consultants of Canada, the LGBT Giving Network, and the Art Gallery of Windsor, where he also enjoyed sitting on the Acquisitions Committee. Welcome to the program, Jay. Always a pleasure to have you join us and talk about the great work that you're doing.
Well, it's always a pleasure to connect with you and Stephen. And I feel that I have to respond to Stephen's offer and say, for you, Marc, I would do absolutely anything.
Oh, the competition is on. I'm going to start making a list, gentlemen. No,
You
just kidding.
realize that's been recorded, Jay.
That's okay. The good me and the evil me. We're never quite sure which one's showing up for these shows. You'll find out soon.
That's the duality of life, right?
Yeah. And
So,
also welcome to the guests that have joined us live and to anyone who sees this after the fact.
yeah, absolutely. We'll be sending it out everywhere. And I thank everyone for joining in our studio audience, where as we get towards the end, we will be taking questions for Q&A with Jay. And so take notes if you like, and we'll come back and we want to hear your voice. So maybe we'll get started right away. Jay, you can tell us a little bit more about yourself, what got you into this line of work, and really, your work with the Psychedelic Association, you know, what's happening there, what's all going on, what's happening, and then we're going to talk about access for Canadians.
So a little bit about me then. I have been a not-for-profit executive for 20 years. I started off as a banker on Bay Street, and I banked in Toronto and Boston. I sold antiques and catered parties and did a whole bunch of things. But the not-for-profit sector for the past 20 years, and I didn't really know a lot about psychedelics until I started engaging with the people at PAC who needed an executive director. And since PAC was founded by some of the longtime leaders in the space, they needed someone with not-for-profit experience. They had lots of psychedelic experts in the space. What I like the most about the job that I do is that I've been on a 30-year mission of personal growth. And working at the PAC allows me to be in a space where the intention and the context and the vocabulary and the meaning of my personal mission are aligned with the vocabulary and the context and the mission of my professional life. They just meld together beautifully. And so it's a real pleasure to be like this. When I first learned about the psycho space 3 years ago, I was just fascinated by what was going on. I think like most middle-class white people, I engaged in psychedelic use recreationally as a young person, but didn't understand really what happens with intent and what happens with professional therapeutic support. And it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to grow and to help the space grow as I did that. The mission of the PAC is to give legal access to psychedelics for all Canadians. Um, I think many of the people here understand the benefit of psychedelic use for people who have mental illness and are struggling with the burden of that every day, but also for people who have goals of creative expansion or spiritual expansion. The organization was founded about 4 years ago by leaders in the psychedelic space, people like Gillian Maxwell, who was one of the people who opened Insight in the east side of Vancouver in the 1990s. And she received the Queen's Jubilee Medal for her work. Dr. Pam Crisco, Salome Tabrice, people who've been working in the space for a long time. We have about 1,000 members from coast to coast. In every province, we have a concentration in Toronto or Vancouver, but those two cities only count for about a quarter of our members, and the rest of the people are spread out throughout the rest of the country. We work to getting legalized access to psychedelics really in three ways. The main way is education and advocacy, working with lawmakers and regulators and educational institutions and research centers, just to help them get the information and help them make the connections they need. And that's really a main focus of our work. However, we also do a lot of work in harm reduction. Despite the most substances being illegal, people are using psychedelic medicine. They are engaging in psychedelic therapy. And so there's a need for ethical protocols. And we have one of the resources on our website is how to pick a psychedelic therapy, how to pick a psychedelic therapist. There are needs for support circles in the space. There's no regulatory process. There's no way to get insurance. And so we have to support one another, and the people in the space have to support each other when there are trying times. I think the last area we work in is in the community with our members. We need to have a strong membership because that's a voice in Ottawa, and the lawmakers are, they pay attention when they hear people in their ridings are involved and think this is important. But we also learned when we started building this community that the people in the community value having a community on its own. So that this was a means for us to motivate Ottawa, but it was also an ends for many people in the community to have a place to meet like-minded people, to have support, to get education. And in those three areas, we're moving psychedelics slowly, mostly steps forward, as we saw at the FDA in August, some steps backward, but progress goes in one direction.
So what actually well, let me put it this way. Do some of your people actually have the ear of some people who are working for the federal government that might be able to influence the direction of policy?
Well, I mean, in one word, the answer is yes. However, psychedelic medicines are really not high up on the list of priorities of anybody in government at the moment. And so having someone's ear isn't helpful if they're not focused on everything you're saying. And so our primary task is informing, educating, building credibility of the space, of the people in it, of the science in it, letting people know what's happening. We're finding that when we meet with lawmakers, many of them have read about psychedelics in the news. They've heard something's going on. They know that they're coming somehow. But it's all very vague, and they really don't understand the context. They really don't understand the science. And it's a job to explain to people how important it is to make these medicines legal, and for them to understand they can rely on the people in the space for good science, good information, and to help them put the right regulations in place, including structures for access and for equitable access. It's right now people who are rich can get psychedelic therapy, either in the gray markets or by going to jurisdictions where it's legal, but it needs to be available to everyone.
Are there interim solutions for getting, providing access for more people from that affordability point of view that you just mentioned, until or before legal access kicks in?
Well, they're very limited. And so there's two kinds of access while they're mostly legal. One is affordable for people who have limits on what they can pay, and one is just is not affordable because it's still illegal. So you can either get it in gray markets locally, or you can go to jurisdictions where various medicines are legal. If you want affordable access in Canada, the only legal way to do it really is to participate in a study.
Mm-hmm.
In the gray market, different practitioners have more accessible therapy and work available than others. But it's as so many people here know, you can't just have some psychedelic medicine and call your doctor in the morning and just sit by yourself. It's really not something to do alone. As many people here know, the set and the setting, the intentions you set up front, the integration work you do afterwards are vital. Many people have said that 80% of the growth comes after the integration phase, and so that requires experienced people who deserve to be paid for what they do. And until it's part of an insurance system or part of a government program, it tends to be expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the one thing, do you know Peg Peters, Jay?
I do.
I know in speaking with him last year, they've done a lot of great work in terms of the medical side of things, where they've actually got insurance coverage that covers basically everything pre-ceremony or medicine work, post-ceremony work, and the only thing that the people pay for is the actual ceremony weekend or the retreat itself, where it comes down to the medicine. And I thought that was a really novel approach and unique way to kind of bridge the gap and find it affordability, because as you said, for rich people or people who have the means, and right now, we take a look at today's current economy, not just in Canada, but around the world, and not a lot of people have the disposable income to sit with these things. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, if you know what he's up to, and the novel approach that they're taking.
Well, I couldn't possibly talk about what he's doing as well as he can. I know that when he was first putting this project together, he was very intent on making therapy accessible by working in a group context. And so that it's several clients or patients per therapist. And so that keeps the cost down. And he's certainly, he's a bright and visionary guy who saw the opportunity and works with people who can be paid by insurance companies. It's a very, they have to be very careful because those licensed psychotherapists and psychologists don't do illegal activities. They need to rely on their licensing and their malpractice insurance. So we have to be really clear about what work people are doing and what work people aren't doing. And, I have the same answer to virtually every question that comes up. And the answer is, and that's why we need regulations, because we need to have people be able to get malpractice insurance. We need to have regulatory bodies that will discipline people who are irresponsible. We need to have centers of knowledge and learning and resources. And all those things happen when we have regulations and when there are laws in place.
So it gets me to think about what's kind of happened throughout the course. Now cannabis is legal in Canada, which is a great thing in many ways. Yeah, and there's been a lot of regulation attached to that, some good, of course, and some maybe restrictive. Is there any comparison that you would make in what you think should be done differently when it comes down to the world of psychedelics? And I want to say one thing, because it was all the pioneers who started the medical dispensaries in cannabis, and now the bud tenders and the people who are in these legal dispensaries can't talk medical at all. So it's a really crazy swing of the pendulum when legal and regulation came into play for cannabis.
I have a friend who's an artist, and he says that everything you do in life is a dress rehearsal for the next thing.
Mm.
And so everything that we do is a classroom, an opportunity to learn. When they made psilocybin therapy legal in Oregon, the people from Colorado went there and they learned what worked well, what was difficult, and they took time, and they're going to have a whole better kind of a space examined simply because they learned. So I think that it's great to have access to cannabis nationally. I think what we learned was that it was done quickly. And approximately, from my understanding, you might know better, but approximately half of Canadians are still getting their cannabis in the gray market. And so the regulations overlook what we could call small business. That's what those independent dealers are, but small business. Um, I think that they were very focused on safety and safety manufacture and product. And I think they rushed through certain things. I think um, we've learned how to be more equitable, both on the provision side and on the customer side. And of course, cannabis is very different than psychedelics. You can ingest cannabis at home by yourself alone without much risk. We advise people not to take psychedelics alone. Psychedelics have to be taken in context of a sitter or company or therapy. Um, the effects of different psychedelics vary much more greatly than do the effects of different kinds of cannabis. Um, it's and there's a very strong tradition of cherished indigenous ceremony and ritual that exists in the psychedelic space going back for centuries that also needs to be accommodated. And so it's there's a lot to learn from cannabis, and there's a lot of things that are structurally different that make the task different.
Mhm. Well, so, excuse me, you obviously know a lot more about the following than I do, or probably both of us, but
Let's hope. Now the pressure's really on, Stephen. Let's see if I can live up to that.
I think you can handle it. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm thinking of two medicines in particular that seem to have the best hope of being the next ones under consideration, and that would be MDMA and psilocybin mushrooms. So, where are things at with that, and where are you guys at with? I mean, are you pushing one particular medicine more than others, or how's that going?
So we're educating, and we're not pushing anything.
I
We're
mean, in your relationships with government
no,
officials and so.
yes, we're not pushing. We're providing because they have people pushing at them all day long, from industry and from community.
Legal access.
Not just in the psychedelic space, for business and for religions and for all sorts of things. They have people pushing at them all day long. Um, in order to get the right regulations in place, they need to understand what's going on. They need to understand that they can work with people in the psychedelic sector in a way that helps them. You know, there's lots of ways to make changes. Activism is a really important way to do that, but the lawmakers don't necessarily sit down with the activists. The activists push the issues to the top of the agenda, and they get everyone's attention, and they make everyone notice, and it's really important work. But sometimes you just have to be there because you have the information and the resources that they need, and can give them trusted advice on which they can rely. And so we're there to educate about all medicines in all ways, not just natural medicines and traditional methods, but we think that there are people who will probably only access psychedelic medicines from patented molecules that come from pharmaceutical companies when that time comes. And so we support that too. And there are people who belong to communities that have been using these medicines for centuries and understand the efficacy and the dosage and all those other things. And that belongs here too. I think the reason why psilocybin and MDA are probably the closest to having legal access first is just the information, the research and the information is available to get people to change their minds and open their minds and see how they're useful. That was a multi-pronged question. I don't know if I gave an answer to every prong. Did I get them all, or did I miss one?
Well, you put it in the proper perspective that, of what you're doing educationally. But I do want to ask you about one other medicine then. How do you see or feel about where things are at and where they're going with ketamine, which is obviously legal for certain practitioners to use?
Well, of course, it is legal, and it's I think that it's an off-label medicine. It's approved as a painkiller, but as happens with the only one I can think of is Viagra, which is a blood pressure medicine, but has another use. And so ketamine is a pain medicine, but it's also useful in psychedelic therapy. I think that for the time being, people who need psychedelic therapy or want it to improve their lives can get it with ketamine. Um, it's not a natural medicine. It's an off-label use, but there are ketamine clinics doing great work across Canada. I'll say that many of them are not as busy as we would like them to be because of what I referred to earlier. People just don't know. They just don't know. There's not enough information up there, and many psychedelics are scheduled drugs. And so that means a lot to some people. And so there's a nuance of stigma attached that we also have to clarify. And we do that with education and information and credibility.
Nicely said. And I just wanted to let you know, Jay, and let people who are watching this at any time, we're going to be doing a program on ketamine in a few weeks with the Empower Health Group and Psy Integrated Health as well, where we can do a deeper dive in regards to ketamine, what it is, its benefits, how to access it, and things of that nature as well. Because as you were saying, Jay, it's people don't know enough about it. And I think it's really important as well because ketamine is really being abused as a party drug right now. And it's something that the young people are using in different ways that I think there needs to be more education around it. And
Well, there are legal pharmaceutical approved drugs, prescription medicines given by doctors to patients that are being abused in a party setting.
yeah, agreed.
And so, you might hear me say this a lot. My answer might have the same answer for every question. That's why we need regulation.
Yeah. So, hey, Marc,
And
while it's on my mind,
yeah,
I didn't know you were doing that about ketamine. We should look at getting Dr. Dominique Morisano involved in that. She's one of our speakers because, with the conference coming up and all that.
yeah, no,
So,
that'd be great.
yeah, okay. Jay, you guys know that I can't stick around all that much longer, and I know you're going to turn it over to questions relatively soon from our live participants here. So I want to ask one more kind of big picture question, and I don't know if you're going to be able to or want to even answer it, but it's something like this. If things go the way they should and the way the PAC wants them to go and the way the people need them to go, could you paint a picture of what the overall kind of context situation once these substances are legalized might look like, say in 10 or 20 years? For example, there's always this question of is there too much danger of these substances being overly controlled by the medical bureaucratic establishment as opposed to making room for more ceremonial use, indigenous practice, et cetera, et cetera? You willing to take a stab at that wild question?
Um, well, sure. I don't know if I'll stab it. I might just caress it and wrap it up in a napkin. But I'll talk more about what we would like to see than to try to predict the future because there's a lot of things at play and there will be steps backward as well as steps forward, as we said earlier, the FDA decision recently being an example. Um,
That's what I meant. What you'd like to see, the picture you
yeah,
envision. Yeah.
so I think I would like to see a situation where between governmental health services and insured services, a lot of psychedelic therapy is covered. I'd like to see a situation where, and we're partway there already, where there are regulations that accommodate indigenous traditions and practices. And I say that we're partway there because many of the nations and communities within the boundaries of their own sovereign nations are engaging in old practices already. I think that it's important that we practice the understandings we gain when we take psychedelic medicines about how we're all connected and how we all have the same origins, and how thoughtful, kind, generous, helpful actions are always more effective and make a better world. I think we have to move forward in that way. And so I see a table where everyone has a seat, from the pharmaceuticals that have patented molecules to the people leading indigenous communities with centuries-old practices, to practitioners of natural methods using natural medicines. And so we know how that works. We have the expertise. One of the challenges in approving psychedelics legally is that it's not like other medicines that are approved, that are brand new molecules invented to fix one condition. We have a history here. We have a history that understands toxicity and dosage and all those things that clinical trials are designed to define. We actually already know, but not in a measurable scientific context. And our system is only designed to see drugs in that way. One of the challenges the FDA had was they couldn't wrap their brain around matching up the therapy with the medicine, and how does that really work, and how many therapists were on those councils anyway. And so we see that we're a bit of a square peg trying to be fit into a round hole. But I certainly see that it's possible, because we have the information, we know how to do it, and there's more and more research every day. 3,000 studies in 2023 alone. And so what we know unscientifically, we're now being able to prove more and more every day scientifically.
And I think that's yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just on that theme, because, as I say, I'm going to have to leave quite soon. The Native American Church in the United States has legal permission from the Congress, the highest level of governing bodies in the United States, to use peyote in their ceremonies. And as far as I know, I've done some research on that. There are two reasons. One is that they were able to show many testimonies of people whose life changed coming into those meetings and taking the peyote and praying that way and so on. But the other one was, strangely enough, it seems to me anyway, a lot of relatively conservative churches in the United States supported it on the principle of religious freedom. So I'm just wondering if you guys have got that under your hat somewhere, that you might approach some of these from the angle of religious freedom.
There are churches in Canada that have legal access to ayahuasca for ceremonies, Santo Daime Church being one of them. And certainly Toronto, Montreal, I think in Vancouver. We haven't done that much work with religious approval. There's a mechanism for that now, although it's a little unwieldy and takes a long time. But in wanting legal access, we want it across the board. And so we're not focused on religious access as much, because if the medicines are legal, you won't have to apply for religious access. And so the current system of SAP approvals and Section 56 approvals, then the religions apply under Section 56. It's unwieldy. Not enough people are getting access to the medicine, and we want legal access. And so with that, religious appeal not relevant, because the medicine to be legal.
Well, couldn't they also be the leading edge of the wedge, though? If they get that kind of destigmatizes them in some ways?
I'm not sure that the religions that are using medicines in their ceremonies are not mainstream, and people don't understand them. And I'm not sure if simply granting the ability for those religions to use the medicine would help change the way people think. And there may be people who worship in one of those religions here on this call who hear this and say, I'm absolutely dead wrong. And there are lots of reasons why that can help sway people. But I think that it's hard to have a conversation about beliefs with people, especially if everyone doesn't share the same beliefs. Science is inarguable. It speaks for itself. And there's a lot of compelling science, and more every day.
And what I wanted to maybe add to that, and as well, Jay, is, you said it so well, where there'll be a lot of people who are more interested in, the clinical side, the science side, because now it's a or it's legal, but now gives them approval. It's kind of like cannabis. As soon as cannabis became legal, people who were more concerned about remaining true to not breaking the law went out and started now experimenting and using more cannabis. So you have this option to use these clinically. And then I think there's the spiritual side, and I won't say religion in that sense, but a spiritual context that's going to freak some people out as well. So, if there's a sweet spot available for people to get the change that they're looking for, there's an avenue on each side. I know when, like, I just want to share my experience with the Native American church when I sat in ceremony with them. It was the most profoundly beautiful experience that I certainly don't think I would have had in the same as a clinical setting. Yet the most important thing to me is that people have access to tools that work for their growth, their transformation, and their healing. And however that looks, I think it's really important. And I think we've seen, based on a lot of research and, social proof is what I like to call it, that, these things make a difference, when done right. And it's like you mentioned earlier, set and setting, intention, dosage. There's a lot of factors that people need to be aware of when working with these medicines.
And there's another, you asked earlier about lessons from cannabis. There's another thing that I hadn't mentioned. Cannabis was legalized and the sky did not fall on our heads. And I think that really left a lot of people who don't know about psychedelics and who may not even have that much interest in pursuing them. But I think it left a lot of people with an open mind because we've already pierced the veil of making drugs accessible to everyone, and it didn't really change anything for anyone anywhere. So I think that that's actually helped make people much more available to learn about psychedelics. I think it's easier to teach people about the power of the science than it is about the power of the spirit or the power of the religion. And since when you want to build a bridge with people, when you want to extend a hand of understanding and build something together and teach people about something that's important for them to know, you have to meet them where they are. If you're up here and they're here and you talk about all the stuff it doesn't connect. And so you have to meet them where they are. And when they give you their hand, you can take them step by step through the knowledge. But if you don't meet them where you are, then will you really ever connect? And so I don't want to give anyone the impression that I think that the spiritual impacts of psychedelic medicines are a second seat to the science. I believe the opposite of that. But I think as far as the job of mainstreaming these medicines, which aren't mainstream at the moment, and convincing politicians whose priorities are the people they serve and the politics in their government bodies, and meeting people with those priorities where they are and then taking them where they tell us they need to be taken the way they need to be taken to be comfortable with this new information. And so uh, um, reflecting back on my earlier remarks of us being a resource, it's not about us having priorities of what we want them to know. It's about us being a resource for whatever they might need, because each different politician will require a different process and a different set of information to get to that comfort zone. And we have a community that is a lot of researchers and doctors and scientists and PhDs and psychologists and psychiatrists and spiritual leaders and indigenous leaders. As we say to people when we meet the lawmakers, whatever you know, if we can't tell you ourselves, we know the person who can. This space is rich and deep and accomplished and competent, and we're here to help them get what they need to get to make the changes that will benefit everybody.
Beautifully put. Gentlemen, I'm going to take this opportunity to go. We had actually reserved tickets for a concert months ago, and didn't realize it was almost at the same time as this. So I'll just say thanks, Michael. Your answers have been really clear and wonderful, and I hope the conversation continues in a lively, informative way. I'm sorry I'll miss the questions from the participants here, but anyway, carry on, folks.
Well,
And
thanks for joining us, Stephen. Always a pleasure to have you here and work with you. So we'll see you on the next round.
okay, that'll be soon,
Awesome.
Mark. See you on
Absolutely.
Saturday.
You will. Well,
Okay, bye
Jay,
bye.
it gets me to thinking when you talk about the science, and it's just to give a big shout out to MAPS and the work that they've been doing over the years to, put the science where it needs to be in terms of the research and the amount of work. And speaking with Marc Hayden over the years, when he was still the director there, was just how much it takes and the importance of the research for the clinical studies, for all of these things that need to happen for these things to become, a more mainstream option for people. And the work that they have done has just been incredible. And I think it's a great example of, how you can go about doing this kind of work.
Mhm. Yeah, it's the science will get us started.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is a good segue, Jay. If there's anything else you want to add, let's see if we have some voices from our panel or from our guests or studio audience here in Zoom. If you do have a question for Jay, we ask you to raise your digital hand if you know how to do that. Right down at the bottom, there's an option on the toolbar to raise your digital hand. We ask you to turn your camera on if you could to ask the question, and we can hopefully shine some light on what you might be inquiring about. All right, doesn't look like we have any questions. Oh, Janice turned her camera on. Do you have a question, Janice? All right. So Michael, if you can bring Janice into the program and you can unmute yourself here. Janice, there
There
we
we
go.
go.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
No, this has been wonderful. So I am curious about the ketamine actually, so I will jump on for that call as well. I've been working in this space as an integration coach for the last 4 years. Most of my clients are in the US. A lot of ketamine clients down there. I'm not sure about what access is like in Canada here. So my understanding is that to have access to ketamine at a clinic, you need a referral from a psychiatrist, but that may not be correct.
I think that is correct, and I don't know the specifics either, but you must be referred. It's a medicine, and it's not a drugstore prescription. You have to be referred by someone, and I do believe it is a psychiatrist. And then you would go to a clinic to have the ketamine
Right,
administered.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wasn't sure if that was different here because in the US, anybody can just sign up for ketamine treatment.
No, and in Canada, if I want to see a specialist, my family doctor has to send me. In the US, you just ring up your doctor, you ring up the specialist and go because you want to see one. And so
Yeah,
we have a different system.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I've kind
Okay.
of gone through the process where I'm now at a place where I'm just waiting for my appointment and timing, and I'm going to work with ketamine in that fashion with the clinic here in Vancouver. But I went through and had to, be referred and have the intake and the forms and the medical questionnaires and all the important things, when you're working with any of these medicines is important to know, because if you're on other cocaine and other things, could be addictions people are aware of. And if anybody's ever seen the Dosed movie, it's very common where people will lie about what they're doing because they want the result of what they think they're going to get from their medicines. And it's really important to be honest with anybody that you're working with in regards to where you're at that way, because the contraindications and where you're at can have not positive effects. So it's just something to really be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And then my other thought was, so a lot of my clients work with me as a coach. I'm not a licensed therapist. They also have a licensed therapist and they love how we team up together. People will go into a psychedelic experience, maybe for medical reasons, for mental health reasons. And then there's a spiritual side to it that's unexpected. They go in for their depression and they wind up meeting God. So they come out and their psychiatrist doesn't really know what to do with that. And so with that as a complementary practice, as their coach working on the spiritual side, their psychiatrist is working on the mental health side, but there isn't insurance coverage for the service that I provide. So I'm wondering if that comes up in conversation at all.
There are people in Canada and the US who are wanting to set up benefits insurance. A lot of people have benefits insurance either privately through their company for prescriptions and acupuncture and counseling and all those other things. They're working with insurance companies and trying to get psychedelics listed as an insurable treatment under benefits, but of course they can't work with anything that's still illegal.
Right.
And insurance companies, they like to have measurable, quantifiable credentials for people. And so certificates, licenses, all those things that acupuncturists have and psychotherapists. And so coaching is hard because there's not a regulatory body yet for coaching.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thank you. That
Well,
addressed
Janice,
everything that I had.
fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for the work you do as a coach and specifically as an integration coach, Janice, because integration is such an important part of working with these medicines. And, some would say it's even more important than the journey, though they go hand in hand, because we have to take what we learn in that experience and be able to apply it to our lives for transformation. So I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah.
My pleasure. Does anybody else have a question for Jay in regards to access to psychedelics or anything that we've talked about over this time? You can raise your digital hand or turn your camera on. We can see you. We can bring you in. We have Melanie White. All right, Melanie. Welcome. Oh, let me unmute you here. There you go.
Hello. Sorry, I missed the first 10 minutes. I was just curious if during those 10 minutes you had spoken about harm reduction as a pathway to access. I've heard of some therapists who say they can get around some of the legal stuff if they say, I know my client is going to take this anyway. I'm here in a harm reduction capacity.
I think we've seen in harm reduction for heroin, for example, that some venues for harm reduction is a way to get access because sometimes access is the answer to harm reduction. We would rather it just be legalized, and the placement of psychedelics as a scheduled drug is very different from the placement of, let's say, heroin. And so psychedelics, as you know, are not particularly toxic and not particularly addictive, unlike heroin. And when they were criminalized in the 70s and 80s, it was for political reasons as part of the war on drugs. There really wasn't any science saying they were addictive or toxic. In fact, there was quite a bit of discontent in the medical and academic communities at the time because they were saying, why are you doing this? And so I think the road to legal access for psychedelics is easier than the road to legal access for heroin, just to pick an example. And so there's not many options other than harm reduction at this point for heroin, but I think that we have a very reasonable option of full legal access. That doesn't mean that we don't believe in harm reduction and we engage in as much as we can, however we can, which for us is about bringing people together, putting together ethical codes, guides on how to pick therapists, things like that. But I think harm reduction has a vital place for legal and illegal substances. But I think that there are probably ways to get more and better access for these medicines than starting with harm reduction, though harm reduction is not a means, it's an ends in itself. And so it's just as worthy an activity, but I don't know. I think there might be better steps to legalization than harm reduction doing anything more than harm reduction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That's a great question. Good answer, Jay, because harm reduction is a big topic today with the amount of you know overdose deaths and the problems that we're facing here in Canada, the US, and really all parts of the world. And it's something, iboga has been a really powerful plant medicine for addiction in terms of its success rate and what needs to be done. And it's scary because I run a lot of social media platforms. What we do is spirit plant medicine, and we get all these kind of spam posts, everybody selling iboga everywhere. And it's, I decline it all because it's not a medicine by any stretch that you should be buying online or doing anything like that. It's a serious, serious medicine that when people are, in the throes of addiction, it's not something to do by yourself. You need proper medical supervision. They have proper training and different ways from a clinical side with ibogaine to people who work with the Bwiti tradition from Africa with just the actual iboga. And it's serious medicine. And it's so important. One of my friends I met years ago, in her talk, she had said iboga has upwards of a 65% success rate for addiction, where the normal way that we do recovery has maybe a 10% success rate. And cold turkey was the next one, which was about 35%. Yet when we take a look at the system with the crisis that we're having, the system that they've got right now isn't working. Most people relapse, right? If 10% succeed, 90% don't. And iboga at 65%, but it doesn't mean you should just go out and do your own iboga treatment, So it's really about, again, education and learn about, and then, pick your practitioner wisely. And like he's saying, is there's jurisdictions where certain things are legal and accessible, and areas where they aren't. And it's about doing your research and finding out what that is for you, whatever medicine you're choosing to work with. So I think it's just really important to understand that, these are serious medicines, even though many are natural and they grow. And, Jay was talking about cannabis, so you can easily ingest that at home. But then the regulation is you can't get a gummy, and they don't sell it more than this because you can eat, I know people who, they're tough guys or cannabis, they eat too much, and next thing you know, they're done. And it's not a pleasant experience if you know, dose yourself too highly. And people don't know. We hear stories about mushrooms and people doing it recreational. They go buy a bag of mushrooms for the first time, and they get a big bag, and they don't know how much to eat. Nobody's told them. And then you wonder why they had a bad trip, because they ate like 5 or 7 or 10 grams. It's a very, very common story, and it's not the way to step into these medicines, especially when you're using them for, healing, for transformation, for whatever it is. The importance of a sitter and some way of doing it in the right intention, safe setting, and dosage is very, very important. So is there any other questions? We still have a few more people in with us. If you have some questions, maybe you can turn on your camera, raise your digital hand. We can get your questions answered. And if not, then we can probably start to wrap up. Jay, if there's anything more you feel that we didn't necessarily cover in access, and the role of the Psychedelic Association of Canada. And I got to say, I was part of some of the original meetings back in the day when the Psychedelic Association was being birthed, and it was just a real honor. And I'm humbled to be part, even today, of the work that everybody's doing, because it's important that the regulators have a place to get information, and that there's a sounding board, even for people who are on their journey. If they need support, the Psychedelic Association of Canada is there for them to be a voice, to listen, and to direct it for solutions if that's what's necessary.
And so thank you for inviting me to join you today, Marc. It's been nice meeting everyone. go to our website, psychedelicassociation.net. There's a lot of resources there. You can spend a lot of time looking at the materials. We have almost all volunteers, extraordinary aggregation of research, ethical codes, links to organizations. I mean, there's really a lot on our website. We send out a newsletter every 2 weeks. Sign up for that. Be a part of the mission of making psychedelics legal for all Canadians. Become a member of the PAC. It can all be done on our website. We have a book club for members only, where we read all sorts of great books with psychedelic content. And so far, we've been able to have the authors of every book that we've read in the book club, because being virtual, they can join us no matter where they might be. Yes, I'll put the link right here. Hang on just a second. Let me do that.
Yeah,
So
I'll get the
I can
link
put the
for
link in the
my
chat.
social media channels as well.
I will do that. Yeah, you can follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. We have lots of followers. But check out the website, because you'll get the answer to some of your questions there as well. It's a really terrific resource.
And you also do regular programs online as well, such as this.
We do webinars twice a month. We take the summers off, but we bring in people from around the world, all sorts of experts and people. We talk about Canadian law, we talk about women in psychedelics, we talk about certain Indigenous practices, we talk about psychedelics and sex, we talk about artists and psychedelics and movie makers and psychedelics, and all sorts of really fascinating webinars.
Well, it's amazing to see the pop culture references now in movies. Even there was even a friend of mine sent me a link, and I was wondering what this was, and it was actually a Disney movie for kids. I can't remember the name of the film. I'd have to go back and dig it up. But there's a clip in there where they were singing a song about the mushroom and follow the mushroom, and it was a psychedelic mushroom, right? Which blew my mind that these things are becoming, so mainstream that they're interjected into so many movies and TV shows and things of that nature. Now I see Chris has joined us. He turned his camera on. Chris, did you have a question before we wrap up?
No, not really a question. Just kind of, I was late coming on here, but it's the first time I've sat in on one of these, and it's definitely interesting, and it's cool to see that there's like this much kind of like drive and support for the psychedelic community especially with addictions. Like I recently actually just went to a standardized treatment program, and I couldn't get in alignment with it, man. It was like it just it felt so outdated, and like I mean I know it, yeah, it's worked for 10% of the however many million people that have done it. But when I came out of it, I went to a retreat. I worked with ibogaine, I've worked with ayahuasca. I'm actually in the same position as you. I've got my paperwork, everything in for ketamine therapy. I've been working with microdosing mushrooms and psilocybin for years, and the leaps and bounds of like success in the recovery that I've had from it's so much more. And it was crazy that when I even mentioned it as a support system in a 12-step based program, they basically told me, you can't talk about that here. This is an abstinence program. I'm like, what? I'm like, bro, you guys got a success rate of like 10%. And I mean, iboga is like, like I think you said 65. I've heard even higher. And I'm so thankful that there's people out there like doing the work and providing the access that's there. And it'd be amazing if it was more mainstream and more people were doing it. Because I went to treatment with 14 guys, and out of those 14 guys, only 4 was their first time, and out of that 14, everyone has relapsed but one. So something's got to change, and it's awesome. There's guys out there working for it. So I clicked on the link to that website, and definitely interested in seeing more. So thanks, guys.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Chris. And this is what I love to hear is, the social proof. Science is one thing, and I think that that's fantastic because we need that for regulation and where the world's going today. But it's when people tell their stories about how these medicines have changed their life. And the other thing I think is, I don't want to say funny, but more ironic or moronic or whatever that may be, is when you look at iboga, you look at mushrooms or ayahuasca or cannabis, peyote, San Pedro, these are plants. Right. It's when you take a plant, sugar is a drug. You take something green, you make it white. Cocaine, coca leaf, powerful plant medicine. Make it white, it's a drug. these are plants. So it's a very, very different thing than using, and this is just my opinion, right? Than
Yeah.
using drugs.
Just to go off of that, another conversation that I didn't understand when I was in treatment was, I wasn't allowed to mention plant medicines. I wasn't allowed to mention psychedelic therapy in any form because they're mind or mood altering substances. Yet every guy in the house, they put on antipsychotics. like,
Right.
yeah, right. Here's your pharmaceuticals. This is no problem. And then I get how they work because it keeps you docile. It keeps you, you're more likely to listen. It subdues your feelings. It makes things easier. But then what happens when you quit taking them? Right? Iboga was a crazy experience. Yeah, it's not something I would just order off the internet and do at home, but in the right setting with the right people. I came out of that, and I think it was the first time in 20 years I walked through a park and was like, this is beautiful. This is a nice place to have a picnic. Like, I had dopamine, and I haven't felt that in 20 years of, whether it be drinking, cocaine, or, sex addictions. Like, everything else it's been one constant dopamine that, I hadn't felt it normally in 20 years. So, that alone, and to curb the cravings and the reflection that you experience in the journey itself, like, how people can be put on, pharmaceutical mood altering drugs and be expected to take them for the rest of their life, but you can't take a plant that's been grown and used for hundreds or thousands of years is mind blowing. So it'd be awesome if it was just more accessible and more people could experience what I have. So once again, thanks, guys.
Thank you for sharing, because I think the social proof and these kind of testimonials are what help support the science when it comes down to, as Jay would say, regulations almost the answer to everything right now, AJ.
But they give people access to have systems for regulated drugs that are powerful, prescription systems and all sorts of systems. Make them legal and regulate them, and that's how you reduce harm, when you put sensible, equitable laws in place that have been informed by knowledgeable people who understand the medicines, and that's how you reduce risk.
Beautiful. Thank you for that, Jay. That's a great way to maybe wrap up and move on. I want to thank you, Jay, for being here as our guest. It's been nice getting to know you over the past couple of years, and I look forward to seeing your team at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, which is a conference, for those of you who don't know, that we've been running here in Vancouver, now in its 13th year. It's probably one of the premier psychedelic conferences in Canada, and it's very different because we bring in, it's not just for the medical community or the doctors and the therapists, it's for everyone. If you're a seeker, we have shamans, we have therapists, we have coaches, we have the doctors and the researchers, and we all come under one roof as community. And, we do a cannabis ceremony on the Saturday night so that we can, share an experience. We have a great ecstatic dance party after that, and the great after party on the Sunday. So, it's a great weekend where people can get their questions answered, meet people like-minded, and also to share their stories as well. So we invite people to join us at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference this November, and you can meet some of the team from the Psychedelic Association who will be there representing as well, and we're always happy to have them there. So any final words, Jay, before we wrap up?
Thank you. I could blather on about this endlessly, so I always enjoy a chance to share all this important information. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for being so receptive. It was nice to meet you all, and I look forward to the next time we cross paths.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jay, so much. So you've been listening to Conscious Living here on 100.5 FM CFRO in Vancouver, Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock, as well as all our social media channels on the interwebs, YouTube, Facebook, wherever else we put it. We've got it on a few different sites. The new Hubcast network, we're out there. So tune in every week. Thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy your beautiful life. Take care, everyone. We are clear. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone.